Alan S. Key, the author, thethirdbasicinstinct.com, his website. Alan, welcome to the show.
Hi there, it's a pleasure to be here. The name's Alex, by the way, but no hard feelings there.
Oh, Alex, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Yes, I have your book right here in front of me, and it says Alex on it. Holy cow. I just said so, Alex, give me your, we have three basic instincts. The first two, everybody knows. They are.
Well, to get into the first one, let me ask you a very simple question. Why do you eat?
Typically because I'm hungry.
Right, and in fact, most people answer that question by talking about survival, which is the first basic instinct. Right. You've actually alluded to something interesting, which is the pleasure of eating or the pain of hunger. So there are three very real reasons why people eat. Now, if I was to ask someone out of the blue without mentioning basic instincts why they have sex, very rarely would they mention the basic instinct of reproduction. They would mention pleasure as the reason for having sex. In fact, most people take precautions not to have children. In Canada, 1 in 3 couples are what we call dinks, which is double income, no kids. So actually, there are even married couples that are obviously not having children. So going back to eating for a second, those three very real reasons why people eat: survival, to gain pleasure, and to avoid the pain of hunger. So what does it all mean? Why are the three reasons? And an answer to that question should shed light on everything we do, because everything we do involves some sort of feeling of pleasure, pain, or other emotion. And
so you're suggesting that, I mean, this is kind of NLP 101. People are typically motivated by moving away from pain or moving toward pleasure. Or Abraham Maslow, his hierarchy of human needs is survival and homeostasis at the bottom, and as you move up through the social needs and the intellectual needs, and at the very top you had self-actualization. Where does that get us to the third instinct?
Well, before we get there, I don't know if it's something that is necessarily talked about in public circles or in the educational circles. And we're living in a world in which heart disease is the #1 killer on the planet. And experts believe is completely avoidable in 90% of cases through change of diet or lifestyle. We're also living in a world where there's suicide bombings. Now, if I was to ask a suicide bomber, a prospective suicide bomber, why they're doing it, I'm sure they would give reasons. But how deeply do they understand their minds?
Right. So, Alan, I've spent a fair amount of time with your book, and it's a very, your book, The Third Basic Instinct, and it's a very articulate screed, essentially, against religion. You purport to prove how or demonstrate how God came about and why it's all BS, and it actually retards our growth. I'm curious how you reconcile that with the fact, which I didn't find in your book, that neurologists at the University of San Diego and others, now this has been replicated dozens of times around the world, they started out looking at epileptics, and they found that people who had these trance experiences, these transcendental experiences of transcendence, tended more often than not to be epileptic. And then they, talking to brain surgeons, found that there were certain parts of the brain that you could stimulate with electrodes and produce this experience of oneness with everything, oneness with the universe, oneness with God, and that so there's a biological system here at operation. And then you compare that, you look then at the study that was published. This was the back 5 years ago, I'm sorry, in the National Association of the American Institute of Mental Health in June of 2000, excuse me. Rice is the researcher, and they're talking about how in this study religious people tend to be more interdependent and non-religious people tend to be more independent, which gets us back to the original question, which is why is there a biological mechanism that produces a religious response? And there's a lot of theorists out there who are suggesting that the reason why we seem to be wired for religion, or at least some of us seem to be wired for religion, is that it increases interdependence, which is good for the survival of the species, which gets us back to your first two instincts.
And there's certainly many ways to look at why people believe in a God. What I've purported is that the third basic instinct is the reason that religions come about in the first place. So there may be many reasons why it's beneficial to survival to believe in a God. And I don't actually go that route in the book, because I think even if there is a benefit to believing in a God, I don't think people do it for that reason. I don't think people, one day think, I'm going to feel better or have a better chance of survival if I believe in a God, therefore I'm going to believe in a God. So, and I think you also
I think they do.
You also alluded to temporal lobe epilepsy, which, again, is more than a minority of people who actually experience that and suffer from that. I don't think we're talking about religion as a minority thing necessarily.
No, but I'm suggesting that most, I would submit to you, and I may be wrong on this, but there is some statistical backup for this, that most people who would describe themselves as spiritual, forget whether they even describe their being monotheistic or pantheistic or animistic or whatever, who describe themselves as spiritual, can identify some point in their lives where they have had an experience of transcendence. And that has then been translated into some sort of a belief system, whether it's, the great spaghetti monster or whether it's Jesus or Muhammad or whatever. And that is associated with feeling stuff, just like hunger is associated with feeling stuff, just like sexual behavior is associated with feeling stuff. All that stuff comes out of, gee, that was really pleasurable, I want more of it.
Right. The way I look at what you're saying is that it might affect the tendency of one group of people to be religious versus another. I don't see that as a reason for religion coming about in society thousands or millions of years ago in the first place. I think it needs something more.
But it did.
And I believe that's the third basic instinct. And
the third basic instinct is what?
Well, the first 30 pages of the book actually gives the reader a chance to discover the third basic instinct for themselves.
So you're just going to tease our listeners.
Yeah, I hate to tease the audience, but I do not want to spoil that experience for the prospective reader.
Okay, all righty. I understand, and Alan, thank you very much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. I'm sorry. Let me tell you, as an author, you will sell more books if you tell people the whole story.